The year is 1914. Europe stands on edge. Nations compete for power. Empires clash for colonies, and old alliances wait like dry tinder, needing only a spark. That spark comes on June 28th in Sarajevo. Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria is assassinated by a young Serbian nationalist. One bullet fired in desperation changes history, plunging the world into darkness. Austria blames Serbia and prepares for war. Soon, the rest of Europe is drawn into the conflict. Europe's alliances are simple. On one side are the Triple Alliance: Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. On the other, the Triple Entente: France, Russia, and Britain. These ties were forged long before the fighting began. When the Austrians were ready to strike, the Germans pledged their support. As a result, within days, the French were committed to defend Belgium if Germany marched through it. Finally, the British came to the aid of Belgium. Within weeks, the great powers of Europe are at war. The world plunges into darkness. Young men march to the front, singing songs of glory, believing it will be over by Christmas. But the reality awaiting them is far from glory. It is hell. The Western Front becomes a frozen line of trenches stretching hundreds of miles. Life inside is mud, rats, disease, and the constant thunder of artillery. Soldiers live in fear of the whistle, signal of another charge into the storm of machine guns. Any movement must be coordinated. So soldiers spend hours sending messages via runners or written notes passed from hand to hand until they reach the officer in charge. Once approved, the order moves down the line, like dominoes. Hundreds of soldiers rise, exposing themselves to enemy fire. Racing across no man's land towards the enemy trenches, they carry spades, not weapons. Their objective: to dig. These brave souls are sappers, a specialized group of soldiers whose job it is to move the front lines, often just a few yards, sometimes a few feet. They work in shifts so that someone is always digging. If successful, they create a small network of tunnels that lead up to the surface near the enemy trenches. From here, they can place explosives and send the enemy back to their own trenches, having taken as little personal risk as possible. The reality is often different. Many fail to reach the enemy trenches. Those who do rarely survive the explosion. Battles like the Somme and Verdun turn fields into graveyards. At Verdun alone, over 300,000 lives are lost for a few miles of ground, yet the battle continues month after month. While this carnage unfolds, a new horror arrives. Poison gas drifts across the trenches, burning lungs, blinding eyes, leaving soldiers to die in agony. Medical services struggle to deal with the new injuries, adding to the death toll. Shells scream above, bullets rip through the air. Men cry out in pain, and death hangs heavy in the air. This is the Western Front, a story of bravery, despair, camaraderie, and loss. In the East, the war tears empires apart. The Central Powers are made up of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire, who together face off against the Russians, British, French, Italians, and eventually Americans. The biggest losers are Russia and Austria-Hungary. Russia staggers under defeat and famine. By 1917, revolution erupts, toppling the Tsar and dragging Russia out of the war. This is good news for Germany, who now have the entire East to themselves. However, this is short-lived. The Ottomans join the Central Powers and the war broadens with new fronts opening up in the Middle East. Men fight in deserts where sandstorms and thirst are as deadly as any weapon. Others contend with tribes who resent both the Arabs and foreigners. Still others navigate treacherous mountains where snow-covered peaks hide hidden valleys of death. Despite valiant efforts, the Ottoman forces prevail, capturing Jerusalem in December 1917, but resistance continues. British and Arab forces join forces to push the Ottomans back. Fighting rages in Palestine, Syria, and Iraq. Even the holy sites of Islam are not spared. The British occupied Mecca in 1916 and Medina in 1919. But the war is not just fought in the desert. Men also battle in ships on the seas. The Royal Navy controls the seas. Germans try to challenge this, but lack the resources to win outright. Instead, they resort to hit-and-run tactics. U-boats are deployed to stop the flow of goods to Britain. With each passing day, the Germans get closer to winning this battle. that is, until the United States joins the war. Fresh troops, supplies, and hope tilt the balance against the Germans. But the cost is already unbearable. Entire generations of young men vanish in the mud. By 1918, 17 million people have died, more than in the previous 200 years combined. Nearly half of those killed are civilians. Famine, disease, and war weariness leave people around the world desperate for peace. In 1918, Germany makes a final desperate play. The German army launches one last major offensive along the entire Western Front. For months, battles rage with unimaginable ferocity. But the Allies hold. With American reinforcements, they push back. Meanwhile, on the Eastern Front, the victorious Bolsheviks simply pack up and go home. By November, the German army is broken, exhausted, starving, and collapsing from within. Kaiser Wilhelm II abdicates and Germany asks for peace. On November 11, 1918, at the 11th hour, the guns fall silent. World War I is over, but peace does not bring healing. The treaty ends the fighting, but not the bitterness. The victors meet at the Palace of Versailles to dictate terms. The defeated Germans are forced to sign away territory, accept full blame for the war, and pay heavy reparations. France regains Alsace and Lorraine, but gains nothing else. Belgium remains whole but devastated. Britain regains Hong Kong, but loses India's independence. Italy gains Trieste and much of Austria's former empire. Japan gets German New Guinea, Marshall Islands, Caroline Islands, Palau, Northern Mariana Islands, and part of Shandong Province in China. Millions of people suddenly find themselves living under new rulers. Whole regions are ethnically cleansed. Families are torn apart, and refugees roam the countryside. Seeds of resentment are sown. The world calls it the war to end all wars, but it was only the beginning. Barely 2 decades later, the world would burn again in an even deadlier war. World War I changed everything. 4 empires were destroyed, millions dead, and a new century defined by scars that never fully healed. The Second World War would only deepen these wounds. The question is, why? Why is it important to remember what happened in the First World War? What can we learn from the mistakes of the past? And how can we ensure that such horrors never repeat themselves? If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe. Your support means a lot to us. Thanks for joining me today. Catch you next time.